raised as a Christian? I mean, to be called a...
Yes, my grandparents from both sides had become Christian thanks to the Quakers from Ohio area. They were missionaries in a small part of central India. That's where my grandparents
Oh, but they came from our Ohio.
Yeah.
I am already excited to hear you talk, so I'm going to force myself to shut up. And tell us then, this book changed everything. What gave you the idea to write a book on this huge subject?
Thank you for that very important question. In 1980, I was thrown in jail in India because I was trying to serve the victims of a hailstorm. And the superintendent of police told me to my face that if you don't cancel that prayer meeting for the relief of these victims, I will personally kill you. I don't need to arrest you. I don't need a warrant. I'll take you from your home into the jungle, shoot you, throw your body there. Hyenas will eat you.
This was 1980.
1980.
Okay, so you're a young man.
Yes.
And you proposed to have a prayer meeting. What was the idea behind the prayer meeting?
Well, the idea was that there had been a hailstorm that had destroyed crops in about 100 villages and the tiled roofs, because people use handmade tile roofs which are very brittle, so a hailstorm can break them. So we wanted to give relief, but the district magistrate ordered me that you are not allowed to do this relief work, because there is a law which says that in the event of a natural calamity, private parties cannot collect money, donations. So I wrote to him that we will not collect any donation, we will only give. So he said, no, if you do not collect money, how can you give? So your work is illegal. So I said, well, the scriptures require us to obey the magistrate, so we will not do the relief work, but we will just call the farmers to come and pray. That really upset them because they suspected that tens of thousands might come to pray, and it'll create a very ugly situation for the government.
Now, when you say for the government, just so we're clear, I'm not quite sure what the situation is in India today, much less in 1980. Who was the premier? Was Indira Gandhi the premier in 1980?
Yes, she was there, and it was really her party which was ruling, but they were afraid that this work, we had already baptized about 100 Hindus, established 5 small churches, and they were afraid that our work will result in many conversions and will become a political factor.
Okay, and the question is, why was this troubling them? It's one thing to be in the Soviet Union. It's another thing to be in North Korea, even to be in a heavily Islamic area, let's say. But what was the situation in India at that time? They did not have religious liberty in India in 1980.
Our state was the second state that had passed a law against conversion. So there was an anti-conversion law in our state. Now it is there in 3 or 4 other states. But the fear was that the work that we were doing would have political ramifications besides religious, because the establishment was not interested in relief. If anybody wanted to do a relief like that, it was assumed that the bureaucracy and politicians will take most of the money, say if Red Cross or World Vision or somebody put in money.
So you're saying there was great corruption in the government.
Exactly. Mrs. Gandhi's son, Rajiv Gandhi, he said that when I send 100 rupees for any project in a village, only 15 reaches there. 85% is swallowed up by my own government.
And I'm Eric Metaxas, and I'm sitting here with Vishal Mangalwadi, who is the author of This Book Changed Everything. It's talking about the Bible. You're relating a dramatic thing in 1980, because I asked you how you came to write this book. So your friends tell you the forces of darkness are real, And I think many of us in the West forget that there's evil. So when your friend said this to you, what's your response?
Well, at that point, we had to decide whether we're going to cancel the prayer meeting. And that raised the question, do we have divine authority to disobey the authorities who are telling us to cancel a prayer meeting? And we decided that no, if we cancel the prayer meeting, that we are not following the good shepherds. We are running away from the wolves. But we need to stand with the people. We need to do what we have to do. They can do what they want to do. So they didn't kill me because the local press started supporting me. And every day I was on the front page. So they just threw me in jail. And that's when I had the time to begin to look afresh at the Gospels of why would they want to kill Jesus, who is doing good work? Why would Paul, who is preaching the good news, healing the sick, get into trouble all the time? And I began to understand what it meant to be good shepherd, why he has to lay down his life. But how India is a democracy, the superintendent of police has taken an oath of office that he will uphold the Constitution of India, which gives me an inalienable right to life and liberty to pray. But he's saying that if you don't cancel this prayer meeting, I will kill you. So how do you build a society where there is relative justice and freedom? So that time in jail helped me to begin to really appreciate. And I went on, I had already studied something of Wilberforce and others, and I began to really look at how did the West succeed in building a society where there was freedom and justice and liberty.
How does this all work? How do you get liberty? And how is liberty connected to virtue and virtue connected to faith? And when I really saw it, I was astounded because everything began to make sense. When you describe the corruption, for example, corruption is inevitable unless you have self-government and liberty that's really working, that the people are aware and where otherwise corruption is absolutely the most natural way that people protect power and so on and so forth. So I guess my question is, when you were in prison at this time thinking about this, you realize that you're in a country that they may have things written down on paper, but effectively, practically speaking, there was and is still tremendous corruption in many governments around the world that purport to believe in democracy.
Yes, the Bush administration saw our current prime minister, who was then chief minister of his state, as a mass murderer. Therefore, the Bush administration did not allow him to come into America. When he became the prime minister, then Obama administration gave him a diplomatic visa to come. So his second in command, who is the head of the ruling party, was in jail for murder before he became the head of the party and really controls the government. So what we have seen of a Saudi journalist being murdered in his own embassy in Turkey, we have had at least 5 journalists killed in India during 2018. So if you look at how many journalists around the world are being killed, that is actually the norm. And America is slipping. The last week, Transparency International released its report for 2018 that America is no longer amongst the 20 least corrupt countries. It has fallen. It is becoming more corrupt. So as America gives up the foundation, the force that made it both free and ethical, moral, America has to collapse.
Unfortunately, I agree, but that's why we're having this conversation. In this book, which is titled "This Book Changed Everything," you're talking about, I guess it seems to me what you're trying to accomplish is trying to get us to appreciate how we got here. And when I say here, to the good things that we have, and how we
Yes.
will lose them if we don't take those roots seriously.
Yes. I mean, just taking liberty, this is an American myth that democracy came from Greece.
You're speaking to a Greek, but I will agree with you because I happen to know that you're right.
Yeah. Well, I have 3 chapters in this book on politics. And the myth was started in Columbia University, went to Chicago University. Will Durant, who was used to give a Monday night lecture in Presbyterian Church across the street from Columbia University, and published his lectures as Story of Civilization and Story of Philosophy.
Will and Ariel Durant,
Durant.
very famous
So
work.
they were the ones who promoted the myth, which was manufactured in America, that democracy came from Greece. The reality is that the greatest of Greek thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, had condemned democracy as the worst of all political system. What Greece exported...
Plato could be wrong, you know.
Yes.
Just because he's Greek. I mean, most Greeks are right about everything, but Plato could have been wrong. I still think there's a case to be made that democracy came from Greece. There's a case to be made, but it's a very limited version of democracy. It didn't last very long.
No, actually, there is no such case to be made.
Oh, yes, there is. Hey, this is my show. No, so I'm actually very curious to hear your point of view on this, in all seriousness, because
Yes.
this is very important. So
Yes.
I joke around, but
Yes.
make the case, because I want to hear this.
David Gress, a historian from Scandinavian American historian, he wrote a book called From Plato to NATO, and he exploded the myth. Democracy, the modern democracy, developed out in Scotland first with the Scottish reformers.
John Knox,
Andrew Melville, etc. Knox kept saying that he's building the New Jerusalem. He is building the kingdom of God. And there were so many imperfections that it became a little embarrassing for the second, third generation to say that they had built New Jerusalem in Scotland. So one of his followers, who were actually older than him, George Buchanan, he coined the phrase popular sovereignty, the kingship of all believers, which is what inspired American Constitution, we the people constitute ourselves.
yeah.
So this idea of popular democracy came from the Bible's teaching of kingship of all believers, that Jesus shed his blood to purchase slaves of Satan, to make them sons and daughters, kings. You inherit your father's kingdom. So the third generation of the Scottish Reformation, which had merged into Scottish Enlightenment, and they were all Christians, they were the ones who were unwilling to say that this is New Jerusalem. They called it democracy. Everybody in Europe accepted the term democracy, including the Christians, because it was embarrassing to call it New Jerusalem. But Europeans knew that this had come, the democracy, the freedom had come from the Bible, not from Greece. The important thing is really that Luther is the one who begins a discussion of politics as a question of freedom.
No question. Yeah, I totally agree.
In France, Jean Bodin is the first philosopher who secularizes Luther's teaching on freedom. And then you have the Huguenots and you have the Scottish reformers like Samuel Rutherford and then Samuel Harrington and then the British John Locke, etc., who begin to discuss what is freedom, how do you establish free society, which has this huge impact on America.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was in Jefferson's home, Monticello in Charlottesville. So the fact is that Luther is teaching the book of Galatians after Psalms and Romans. His teaching of Romans begins the Reformation. In Galatians is Paul's fight for freedom. Galatians 5:1 says that Jesus has set you free. Don't allow anyone, not even the Christians, fellow Christians, to enslave you. And what is freedom? How do you become free? How do you sustain freedom? And how do you become a free Lord who is servant of all? That's the paradox.
I mean, that's the famous, Luther makes this famous paradox, right?
Correct.
And it's a beautiful paradox because it explains everything. I mean,
Yes.
it's, So we're under the authority of God, and because we're under the authority of God, we have authority and we have freedom. I mean, it's nothing else works.
So I have a chapter in the book
Yeah.
which is called Chancellor, President, Prime Minister. Whatever happened to the emperors who redefined leadership? So why in the German-speaking countries ruled by chancellors, in many of the English-speaking countries by prime minister, the first servants, and why didn't America have King George or Emperor George Washington? Why did you have a president, one who presides amongst equals? So who changed? So this studying the Bible's impact on global politics. Our first prime minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, when I heard him at the age of 13, he introduced himself, "My countrymen, I'm come here to address you as your first servant," because that's what prime minister actually means. So that revolution, whereby kings of England lost their power, servants increased their power, the first servant became the most important office. That revolution, political revolution, began in the upper room in Jerusalem.
There's no question. I mean, when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples, that you're right. This is the moment when leaders are defined as servants. Servant leadership begins then. Of course, there's no question about that. And all of those things come out of the Bible. And if I hadn't written my book on Martin Luther, I would not myself see how clear it is. So that's what you write about in this book. In other words, the modern world today, everything we take for granted. I wrote about this in the afterword to the Luther book, in a way, because I said I've learned so much. I want to sum up how we got here.
That is correct. That there is common grace. There is insight into justice, into fairness, equity, etc. And the Reformation generation is quoting the humanists and the ancient writers. But Knox, who's turning his church, Presbyterian Church, and then his nation into a democracy, he actually uses the word democracy only 2 or 3 times. And he's very clear that he is building the system on the Bible.
Vishal, there's so much here. That's what's exciting about it. We're talking about ideas, but you talk about them in an exciting way to help us understand, in a sense, the stem cells of modernism and liberty and freedom, where it comes from. You make the case that it comes from the Bible. There's no doubt in my mind that that's true, but let's break it down more specifically. I mean, you talked about Knox and those kinds of things. Let's go farther. What else do you cover?
Well, tolerance is a very big chapter there. And as someone who has written on Luther, you would know that Luther is the source of modern tolerance. Now, I spent whole of 2017 in Germany celebrating the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. Most of the Christian leadership was talking about how Luther crushed the peasants' revolt and how anti-Semitic he was.
Most of the Christian leadership. Well, this is the liberal left wing drank the Kool-Aid Christian leadership, yes. and it is actually quite unfortunate, because I would even argue with them that they are just basically wrong on those things. And yet, even if they're right, to focus on that is a misreading. It's unfair to history.
Yeah. But the fact is that when James Madison is introducing the Bill of Rights, he's quoting Luther, especially his sermon in Marburg on 2 kingdoms. When Locke is writing about tolerance, he's quoting Luther. So tolerance actually came to Europe from Africa, North Africa. Lactantius, etc. They were writing, and Tertullius. They educated Constantine to make Christianity legal before it became the exclusive religion. And then throughout the Middle Ages, anybody who is writing about tolerance is quoting the African writers.
When you said the African writers, you said Tertullian?
Tertullian and Lactantius. Both of them argued at a time when Rome is persecuting, Rome is ruling North Africa.
Sure.
And when Rome is persecuting Christians, they are the ones who are teaching biblical theology of tolerance. And Constantine actually hires Lactantius to read his own books to the king, which helps prepare the ground for Rome allowing people to worship Jesus. But, so throughout the Middle Ages, it is these North African intellectuals, theologians, who after 7th, 8th century, they are captured by Islam, but they are being quoted in Europe. But Martin Luther becomes the central point who brings in today's idea of religious tolerance.
Although there's an irony, of course, because Luther brings the idea in, but he doesn't see it all the way through. In other words, he sees it on a state-by-state level. Okay, Saxony can be Protestant, but we're going to go to war with the Catholics, and we're not going to allow Catholics within Saxony. In other words, it took a while for this to percolate onto the human level. It was still on a political level.
The Peace of Augsburg, 1555, is pragmatic peace, not principled peace, and that's where you're right.
But it's still, of course, but that's 12 years after Luther's death.
Yeah.
I'm saying during Luther's life,
Yeah.
he was not a big advocate of let's respect the Jews or the Catholics. He didn't. He had created the seeds of these things, but he didn't see it all the way through.
Yes, he didn't see the fruit. He is a child of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
But he is laying the seeds, the biblical, intellectual, philosophical foundations, which by 1648, in the Peace of Westphalia, you now have a principled peace that people can be even Calvinists or whatever, Anabaptists, and they will be part of the same political system. So, but Locke then goes to Amsterdam. Holland has been the really source of peace. So New York, here where we are sitting, was New Amsterdam, and the source of the the Dutch ideas of freedom that came from here and spread from here in America. So it is very interesting that right up to the introduction of the Bill of Rights in America, it's Luther's ideas that are being quoted, and he's struggling with the Bible. He's giving completely fresh interpretation of the Bible. So the chapter on tolerance, that tolerance is the Bible's gift to the West. My politicians, Democrats, they want to kill me. I mean, they are not the Democrat in the American sense, but they are part of the democratic system in India. They want to kill me because I've organized a prayer meeting. There is no tolerance, although our Constitution is giving me tolerance. So every day I get 2 or 3 or 4 news items of how Christians and evangelists are being persecuted in democratic India today.
Well, because the word democratic is in quotes, isn't it? In other words, it's not real democracy. It's a type of democracy. It's a sort of a bastardized form of the real thing. It's not. But you can say the same thing throughout history. We have examples. You could say the same thing about Luther's Saxony. Okay, the truth of the gospel was beginning to work itself out, but it would take time to percolate, as I said earlier, all the way in. And then, of course, by the time you get to the United States, you have it. Finally, you see genuine religious liberty. In fact, it even took time here before everybody acknowledged it. But the point is, it moves along, and it's like a little piece of leaven leavens the whole lump. Slowly, it works its way through.
That's what Jesus said, that kingdom of God is like a seed. Small seed, you plant it, but it grows. It changes everything.
Vishal, again, congratulations on this book. It's a tremendous accomplishment.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward already to the other volumes in the series, but the title is This Book Changed Everything. What else should we talk about? Just a few minutes left in this hour.
Well, the most important issue is really philosophy. The whole gender confusion, homosexuality, abortion here in New York, and now Virginia coming up. Do human beings exist as immortal souls, precious, with dignity, with inalienable rights? Or is man really a robot with biointelligence? So why did the West believe that human beings are created equal, with equal dignity, endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights? Did God make human beings in His image, male and female? Or are male and female artificial linguistic constructs? So this is the heart of the battle. What the Bible gave to the West was a notion of that every human being, is immortal, precious, made in God's image. And that, in rejecting the Bible, that is what the West is rejecting. So the gender confusion, no, male and female are artificial constructs, and that is the baby who is still tied with umbilical cord to his mother is really not a person. Personhood is something what the state ascribes. The rights is what the state gives. This is something that we should take up in the next round of discussion, because this is what will destroy the West, make it like our countries. Because Buddhism, for example, the heart of Buddhism was that you don't exist as a soul, which is where, from beginning with David Hume right up to Nietzsche and then postmodernism, this is where the West has come, that modernism's project was God is dead. The implication of that is man is dead. You are no more than a robot.
Well, it follows logically, but very few people explicate it, which is one of the reasons I'm happy to have you on the program. Is there a website? I haven't mentioned if there's a website.
There is revelationmovement.com.
Revelationmovement.com.
.com.